Welcome. Today's video is the second in a series of 5 videos on field testing, and in today's video we're going to learn about how to prepare your instrument. My name is Maria Mindlin and I'm with Transcend, and I'm working on this project with Anna Highline of Law New York, Mary Zimmerman of Idaho Legal Aid, and this project was financed by an LSC TIG grant, which has also financed a number of other readability and plain language projects. In today's video, we're going to be looking at how to prepare your instrument. So to make sure that everyone knows what an instrument is, if you weren't with us in the last video, basically it's a written document. It's the moderator or the facilitator script. It's a list of questions as well as rationales for each question. When you're writing documents, you would need to create a new instrument for each document that you create. There are certain parts of the instrument, however, that will remain constant for any type of content that you're testing, and then there are questions that will vary according to your specific content. The reason that we're field testing and that we're learning how to create an instrument is that we want to create a feedback loop between the writer or writers of a document and the end users. The end user comments can be tremendously helpful in terms of improving our text to be able to write it in ways that's more easily understood, and this helps us achieve the ultimate goal of maximizing our readership. So maximizing the number of people who actually can read and understand the information that we're providing. Okay, so let's jump right in. Step 2, prepare your instrument. So where are we starting in this process? In the last video, we talked about creating a draft. By now, you should have your best draft handy and available. And what is the best draft? Your best draft is your document that you want to share with end users. You believe that it is clear, it's concise, and it's focused on a particular topic or on a particular step within a topic. It's correct. Again, writing in plain, simple English isn't an excuse for providing incorrect information. We just need to find the proper words and the proper way of presenting that information. It should be at the reading grade level, which OECD data tells us is between the 5th and 7th grade, and that's the average U.S. reading proficiency level. We want it to be short. If you have a vast topic, for instance, small claims, divorce, unlawful detainer, you're going to have to break it into steps and phases so that you're creating a series of short pieces. We know from reading research that a document or a text at a website that's 1 or 2 pages long is much more likely to be read than longer texts. The goals for today's video are: we want you to learn what all instruments must have, how to write open questions, how many questions to ask, how to make test participants feel comfortable, how to avoid influencing the participants' answers, and we're also going to give you the best resource out there for learning how to do focus groups on your own. So very quickly, let's take a step back and make sure that everybody knows what type of testing we're talking about. There's quantitative testing and there's qualitative testing. So just a quick description of these two different types of testing. The quantitative testing, which is quite different than what we're going to be learning about, is used for larger and more expensive type projects. Usually it's used for large surveys, polls, e-tasks, usability studies. The advantage of quantitative testing, when it's structured properly, is that you can look at the data and you can generalize your findings to the larger population. It's much more expensive than doing qualitative testing, takes longer to plan and much longer to execute. You also have to bring quite a few people with different areas of expertise on board. You'll need a statistician, you'll need a field test professional to participate with you and review all of your instruments to make sure that they're not influencing the outcome. And you'll also need independent monitoring and other controls. For qualitative testing, that would be for things such as observations, interviews, chats, focus groups. We like them because they're fairly quick, they're reasonably inexpensive, and they're very instructive. Your findings are based on what you hear and what you understand. Let's talk about the size of the focus group. A large focus group is considered to be 9 to 12 people, and often focus groups in large commercial centers bring in this number of people, sometimes even more. At Transcend, we use the smaller focus group. We find that it's really perfect in terms of being able to look at each question in the type of depth that we want to. It's also more manageable and it's a bit less expensive than doing the larger group. So let's get back to focusing on our instrument. We know that the questions that we're going to ask about our content have to be tailored to that particular content. So for all of you out there, what I'd like you to do right now is to look at your content. Take a highlighter or pen or whatever you'd like to do and highlight the areas that you believe are the most important areas that you want the readers to learn. Let me show you some examples. So this is a text about language access rights. It meets the basic criteria that we talked about before, about being fairly concise. It's about 150 words. It's at the right reading grade level. It's about 5th grade. And hopefully it's clear. It's been edited a few times back and forth between the agency and the plain language writers. But now we have to look at it and decide what really are the most important things here that we want the readers to understand. Do we want them to know all the places that they could go to get an interpreter? Do we want them to be able to list their language access rights? Do we want them to know how to be able to make a complaint? There's quite a few tasks going on here, and we have to prioritize them and decide which ones are the most important ones. Here we're looking at the same text as on the previous page, and we're playing with it a little bit to see how we're going to format it. This is something that happens with all text for public consumption, that we want to make sure we're formatting it for maximum readability. And if you weren't with us in the first video, that will talk about readability tips of what you can do in terms of format to get your readers to read the most important parts of your information. And I just would like to take you through a few drafts so you can see how we go through things that we like and we don't like. Let me give you some examples. This object right here is actually the international symbol for interpreting services. ultimately, and you might be happy about this, we decided we didn't like it very much, and we ended up creating something new that we think we liked much better. In this format, we were still trying to give this international symbol a bit of a try, and thinking maybe just a little bit of black outline might make it better, but in the end, we thought it was just too big and overwhelming for the rest of the text. And knowing that we had English on half a page and the target language on the other half of the page, we had to decide how we could place the text to get the person to read things in the right order and then separate things out. Here's another example of trying to find different ways of, most importantly, conveying that there was something going on in terms of language so that someone could look at this at a glance and understand this was about translation or interpreting. In the end, this play led us to decide that, well, we didn't like this idea very much. It was something that could work in a black and white format to be lower budget, but we decided it wasn't very attractive, and the formatting layout techniques that we used didn't really seem to enhance what we thought were the most important things. Here we're getting pretty close to what the final version is. And now that we have everything in front of us, and we have it in a way that we can see all the different elements, we have to identify what the most important parts are so we can structure open questions in our instrument to find out if the readers are really seeing those parts. For instance, is the most important part that you have language access rights? Is the most important part where you can get language access services? Or is it this card over here? And do we understand what this card is for? How about being denied language access rights and knowing what to do with it? Or understanding what your language access rights are. So even though we only have 150 words on this page, there are a lot of things going on. And we have to take a step back and say, what are we trying to tell the person? What are the most important parts? And let's ask about that in our instrument. So what is the instrument? Your instrument basically has different parts. You have your introduction, and in my opinion, this is the most important part. This is where you set the tone, this is where you make everybody feel really comfortable, where you really explain to people that all of their contributions, whether they're critical, whether they're complimentary, are really helpful because they're doing a genuinely important job of helping us make a document or content better so that it will be easier for other people. You have your content questions, and those are the questions that vary from one instrument to the other, that we were just wondering what were the content questions on that language access flyer. Language questions to tell us whether particular words are challenging and what words are generally used in the community that would be better. And those would be words that would be correct, but more conversational and more everyday. We want to know what people like and dislike about the content that we've created, the flyer, the document, the form. And this part is really great. I would say that over the years, as we record and explore likes and dislikes that people have, you really start to develop a sense of what readers in particular groups, perhaps age groups, geographical groups, tend to like more, tend to really dislike. To give you an example, one of the things that I would say is categorically true is that most readers of any educational background dislike cross-referencing. They want to have information given to them at one time in the same place, rather than having to go look for it in another section of the publication or in another document. So that's a good takeaway to know. We want to make sure the title is working. In our last video, we talked about how important titles are. The title has to be transparent. It really has to convey what it's about in the way the reader can understand. For example, if we have a title on the language access document that is completely ridiculous and expresses it in linguistic terminology that really doesn't mean much to the reader, it's not likely that they'll actually read the document. And then we have an open area that we ask people for more input. So what I'd like to do next is to show you the first draft of an instrument that we created for this little language access flyer. And as I mentioned before, generally speaking, except for the content questions, the other questions typically remain the same. So this is the first draft, and a lot of these sections, as I mentioned, except for the content questions, come from a template, but you'll have to modify them a bit according to who you're working with and what it is that you're testing. We think it's important to make sure that everybody is on board in understanding what the instrument is and why you're using it, what each part is for. So in the left-hand section, this is the verbiage that the moderator is going to say, or facilitator, it's the same thing. And over here is the rationale of why we're saying that information. So we always start off with introducing ourselves, explaining who we are, where we're from, what we're going to be doing, and how happy and grateful we are that the participants came to be with us to look at this particular document. We talk about how important it is for them to feel comfortable saying absolutely anything. And when they contribute in that way, it really helps us because we'll be able to make it better for other people. So they're really doing us an important service. Some tips for the facilitator: we never correct. And in terms of correct, we don't complete. It's important to recognize each person's contributions. Usually you do that by saying, okay, great. So you think this document is for people who don't speak English well. All right. And then you go on to the next person. And no matter what the person says, you can just validate it or say thank you and go on to the next person, being very positive, very calm, and very focused on keeping a proper pace. Once in a while, people are very concerned about the content and they want some more information. They might be asking you for some legal information of, you know, this happened to me and what can I do in this particular situation? So make sure that you stay on task with what you're doing and let them know that that's really a great question. You won't be able to answer it, but after the focus group, you'll talk to them more about it and see if you can steer them in the right direction to someone who can. These are our content questions. And we always start with asking people if they know what this is about. It could be the content, it could be a form, a flyer, whatever it is you happen to be testing. Over here in the rationale, you can see why. We talked about this last time, reading interest, reading persistence. If a reader cannot quickly identify the purpose of a document and situate him, herself, and her interest in reading that document, we know from reading observational studies that people are not likely to read it and they will go on to something else. So for this question, we don't want to allow much time. We want to ask what it's about, wait 30 seconds, and then see what people have to say. Then we go on to who is it for? And again, if you can't see your own personal interest in reading something, you're less likely to read it. If we, for instance, have an article that has important information for farmers applying pesticides or whatever, and you don't see that you're going to be doing that, why would you read it? If this flyer about language access rights was really created for attorneys or courts or agencies and written with that audience in mind, it's going to be much harder for the person to be able to read that language and also find his or her place in that document. So our goal when we wrote this piece was for the reader to be able to see that it was directed to him or to her, for the person who does not speak English that well. Okay. And so the rest of the questions are related to the specific content. So the agency that created this document identified the areas that they felt were most important. Let's look at question 4, and I'll try and explain that. They wanted us to create a situation that would be typical of a limited English-speaking person's experience of why they might need an interpreter, and ask them to look at the card and say, what would you do if this happened to you? So we would set up a situation that, okay, so let's say you didn't speak English very well. And by the way, this focus group was conducted in Spanish with people that were limited English speakers. And but you need food stamps, or you need to talk to the police because there's a problem in your building. Okay, let's look at this flyer. What does this flyer tell you to do? So by setting up a situation like that, you force them to read the information on the page and see if they can actually find what the answers to that very likely situation that they might face. When we look at these little pens and answers down there, those are not things that we say out loud, but that's for the note taker, that he or she would put a check mark for each time one of the participants said that, or write what they said in the other situation. So it's just a more efficient way of gathering the data about how each question was answered. And the rest of the content questions are oriented in the same way. They're open questions. So, for instance, if we look at number 5, we're asking them, let me say it this way. We're not asking them, would you call this number if you had questions about your language rights? Which would be yes or no, and who knows if they really would, because they're not in that situation. You're asking them to look at the whole thing and say, what would you do if you had questions about these language rights? Now they have to look at the card. Is there any part on the card that says what to do if you have questions? Is the information there understandable? Do they know what to do? What are they supposed to do? So here's a question that is open, because it situates them as a genuine first-time experience with a document, with a particular task, to see if they can figure out how to accomplish that task without the support of another person. Now we're going to go on to the other parts that are fairly constant across instruments, and these are the likes and dislikes. And these are things that we like to keep track of to hear what people say over time. And it could be that when you ask the people to, let's just take a step back and let's just look at this document and tell me anything that you like or you dislike about it. Let's start with like. Tell me what you like about this. Well, sometimes you say that and you don't hear anything, but we mustn't say anything that influences what they say. So you could enhance that by saying, well, tell me maybe what do you think of the colors? Or what do you think of this graphic over here? So without eliciting a certain type of answer, if you can just get them going, they'll run with it. And this is a part that tends to be very rich. It's also set up in a way that our note taker and observer can keep track of who's saying what. So we might end up with a report of, 7 out of the 8 people thought the font size was too small. 1 out of 8 people disliked the colors. This sort of thing. Or imagine if everyone said no one could understand that the icon for the computer was really a computer. So it can really give you very important and powerful, actionable information that you can change. Moving on to the next area, which is the title. Again, the key generator of reading interest. We did this focus group in Spanish, and sadly in Spanish, the way to ask about language rights is a bit more complicated than it is in English, significantly more complicated in English. And I think it really revealed some of the problems that this document had. And one of the things I'll just give you a little heads up about is you have language access rights. Okay, so this is supposed to be the title, what draws them in and gets them to read it, and it's interesting and it pertains to them. But what if the title uses words in English or other languages? People really still don't even know what you're talking about. And that was definitely the experience in Spanish. It was felt that the words were difficult, it was academic, it wasn't immediately clear that basically this was about getting an interpreter if they weren't able to communicate with someone at an agency. So it was great to get this feedback and to be able to know that we really needed to rethink what the title was going to be and what was the biggest need on the part of the readers, so we could put that need, the language of that need, in the title. And moving to the last part, on other improvements, this also tends to be a very rich area. Just say, okay, let's just look at the whole thing. And I'd like each of you to tell me if you could change absolutely anything on this flyer to make it better, what would you change? And so this part is less focused than any of the other questions, and it can often be a place where you get really interesting and useful suggestions. And again, the facilitator's job is to accept all of the ideas warmly, to be efficient, to move on to the next person, and your observer and note taker will take down all the information that you're getting. I'm sorry, before we move on to the next slide, I'd like to point out that this first draft, is available to you on writeclearly.org, and that website actually was funded through a previous LSC grant, and it has a lot of other really great plain language and readability information and tools there. So if you haven't gone there yet, I suggest that you check it out. And you can download this instrument and you can use it as a template for yourself. The instrument that we just looked at had 10 questions. And that's a good amount of questions. The resources that we'll recommend for you on focus group testing suggest that there should be no more than 12. And this is pretty common sense. You don't have a lot of time. Usually focus group tests take about an hour. And the reason that the actual test takes about an hour, and the reason for that is that you want people to be at their best and to be participating actively and energetically. And it doesn't do you much good if you have a 4-hour test and people are tired and they're not really commenting much anymore. So you want to get a lot of information in the time frame that you have that's best. So think about an hour, hour and a quarter, and 10 to 12 questions is really ideal. So this is the resource that we want you all to get. It's really fabulous. It's a kit of 6 different books that are about 40 pages each, written in very plain language, very easy to get through. It takes you right from the beginning of understanding really what testing is and isn't, and what you should take away from your results, through the planning, writing your instrument, moderating, recruiting, and analyzing and reporting your data. If you read this, you'll have a good, solid framework for doing your own field tests. And you can get them used from Amazon for $15, so it's really wonderful resource to have. And that's the end of video 2. I hope it was useful for you in terms of understanding how to prepare your instrument. The next video is going to be on pretest, and that's when you get a chance to rehearse and refine your instrument. We'll explain why you should do this, what the tester roles are, and by that we mean the facilitator, the note taker, and the observer. We'll show you how to collect language and demographic data, and we'll also show you how to very efficiently indicate possible revisions to a document or to your instrument. We hope this video was useful for you today. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in video 3.